Good evening, folks, and welcome to another vBrownBag. Actually, this is the first vBrownBag of 2022. So, welcome, Tim. Welcome to the brand new year. This evening, we are very excited. So we actually closed last year with Corey Quinn, and we like folks at the Duckbill Group so much that we also hit up Tim, and he graciously agreed to come on and have a conversation with us. Last year, it was a hard and fast QA, and we didn't really get into like cost awareness architecture or engineering practices. So we're dipping back into the pool of talent that is the Duckbill Group, and we're going to be talking cost awareness architecture and engineering practices with the illustrious, the amazing, the El Jefe of the restaurant, Tim Banks.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's funny, we were talking about that Twitter handle before. So my Twitter handle is El Jefe and not El Jefe, because I used to work in kitchens. I was working my way up from line cook to executive chef. And as in a lot of places, I had, most of the back of the house were from Central and South America, right? And so, they would call me El Jefe because I was the chef and the boss. So a little bit of portmanteau, which is French, not Spanish, but they would say, El Jefe. So it kind of stuck. And I've been El Jefe ever since.
Awesome. Cool. Well, before we get started, let's do a couple of housekeeping notes. Get in on the conversation. If you are watching us in the live studio audience, please feel free to put something into the chat or the Q&A if you have got a question for Mr. Banks as we continue with the presentation. If you are online, you can either hashtag vBrownBag or @vBrownBag, and me and Sean will be paying attention to the Twitter sphere and the chats and all those things, and we will pepper Mr. Banks with all of your amazing questions. So if you want to follow him online, I highly encourage that you do. He is at ELCHEFE on Twitter, say hello to him. He definitely posts some really fun stuff, both about AWS costing architecture, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. As some of you know, martial arts is near and dear to my heart. So when I saw all of his stuff on there, I was like, yeah, go Tim. Especially for an old fart like me. Whenever I see somebody that's got a little bit of gray in their beard too, I'm always like, oh yeah, still getting it.
I wish I had a little bit of gray in my beard.
So my name is Chris Williams. If I highly discourage you from doing so, but if you want to follow me, I am at Mistwire. I also tweet about crap. Sean, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, and I'm Sean Doyle. You can follow me at Cloud Osmotic. I just tweet random things, mostly positive, I think, but who knows? Mostly cloud.
Of all of the vBrownBag hosts, Sean tweets the most relevant and amazing stuff. He is the smartest one in the group.
Nope, but yeah, you can follow me there. Yeah. Glad to be here.
Right.
Glad to see everybody in the new year.
Let's. I'm going to stop my share. Mr. Banks, if everybody's saying hello. So a bunch of hellos from the folks in the audience. Mr. Banks, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, you have the power.
Sure. Give me a second. You keep saying Mr. Banks. So I'm like, oh man, it's like,
look,
my dad.
I'm trying to be all respectful and stuff.
No,
and he's El Jefe. I who knows what could happen? I can get taken out in the back.
All right, let's see here. I want to make sure everybody can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so I'm Tim Banks. As I said, we're talking about cost-aware architecture and engineering practices. So now is when I put up my bio slide, and it's kind of very long and blah, blah, blah. I got a really nice picture there. The important part is the last part, that I am a competitive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. I'm the 4-time and reigning current Pan American champion in my division, and the American national champion in my division. So it's like, I can argue with my brains. But if you next time you see me at a conference, if you want to have a fun role, let me know and I'll be glad to. But no, most of my I don't have the kind of the college background. I'm an old systems architect, systems administrator from back in the commercial Unix days. So I've learned things from when stuff started out as when infrastructure as code was just a a zipped directory that you FTP'd from server to server all the way through, the introduction of kind of modern DevOps and SRE practices. So, I've worked in a lot of environments, stuff like that. So some of the stuff that I bring isn't theoretical. It's from getting surprise builds myself. So, I've been kind of there. And so I think what's really important is that we understand that some of the, I'm really going to give you the really good secrets to cost-aware architecture. Now, there's a lot of stuff you can see on, like Google and stuff like that. Part of the reason that they pay us because we really have unlocked like the secrets of architecture. So if you're here for it, great. If you're not, we may have to work out some things. Chris, later on, we would delete some of this because some of this is proprietary. So I think you'll understand and as we go on. So like at the next slide, this is where the secrets really start. If everyone's ready, you ready? I hope those recordings ready.
I'm beside myself. Oh,
there are no secrets for cost optimization. And it's true, right? Nothing here is really actually a secret. There's, there are the things that I'm going to talk about. There are things that are already kind of best practices, or things that most of us already do to some extent. We're just not aware of their impact on cost architecture. And one of the things I want to talk about when we talk about cost-aware architecture is that we have several pillars of things that we already do and we already consider for our architecture, right? We consider performance, right? We consider resilience and availability, and we consider security, right? Those things are almost always paramount in our concerns when we develop our architecture for our infrastructure and applications, things like that. And cost becomes an afterthought, right? I'm a firm believer, and have been a firm believer for a long time, that 90% of your cost optimization, right, you can do on the whiteboard before you lay the first key on the keyboard, right? Because the second you lay your key on the keyboard, you're incurring technical debt, and you're oftentimes incurring like actual real debt. So let's talk about some of these things. So there's some basic principles. Take care of little ones and zeros, right? So the cheapest thing you can do with data is just let it rest, right? So once you start to do anything other than just let it rest, it starts to get more expensive, right? When you store it, you want to store it in the cheapest way that makes operational sense, right? So if you have to have, hot access to something, sure, you can put it on an NVMe disk, you can put it on EBS volume or something like that. But if you don't need it that hot, if it doesn't need to be in a block store, don't put it in a block store, put it somewhere else, right? If it's relational data and you need to manipulate it, okay, that's great. You can put it in a database, but you don't maybe need all of it. You don't necessarily need all of it in the fastest stuff, right? So kind of categorize what you're going to do with your data if you're not going to let it rest. When you're looking at that, you need to figure out how to get data from one place to another, right? If you have to move data, you want to move it as short as distance that you can. You don't want to have to move it between regions because that's very expensive. You certainly don't want to have to move it over the open internet, because that's the most expensive. Preferably, you don't even have to move it between availability zones. That's not as expensive, but it still incurs a cost. If you have to move it in and out of AWS direct connection, these are all things you want to factor in, right? You don't want to move the data very far if you have to move it at all. In the way that, if you have to send it out of the open internet, try and move it within your network or within your VPC as much as possible before you get it out to the open internet, right? Obviously, we, for the most part, we want to get data out to users or customers or whatever it is, but we want to try and get it there as quickly and cheaply as possible. If you want to move the smallest amount of data that you can, right? You don't have to move an entire object the whole time. You can cache it. You can use CloudFront. Sometimes you just want to use code and then have the browser pull it down from other places itself. And that's kind of a modern architecture, but it's also a cost-efficient practice, because you don't want to put 9 cents per gigabyte out of your VPC for every single thing that happens, right? This applies to other ways that we don't typically think of, right? Logs and metrics, right? A lot of us collect logs for observability and metrics for observability, but you don't have to collect every single little thing that is spewed by your application, right? If you have to log things for compliance, sure, okay, put it directly into S3. If you have to log it so it's observable, if you have to put it in CloudWatch, which I don't recommend that you do, but if you have to put it in, only put the important stuff, right? You don't have to throw every single informational thing out there. Move the smallest amount of data possible, and it's going to be cost optimized. And you want to write that into your architecture. You want your application to know, if I have, or your developers know, if I have to go look for something, it's going to be here. It's going to be here. right? But I don't need to go combing through or querying through like every single thing that has ever been emitted by my application in CloudWatch, because that gets expensive. Finally, if you don't need the data, delete it, right? Or move it down to cheaper storage if you can. But these are just things that if you want to be able to have a process or a cycle or some kind of life cycle policy written in on the whiteboard so that you know where your data is going to be if you need it. And you can gradually bring it on down to cheaper and cheaper storage each time. So I don't know what a normal thing is. I guess if anyone has any questions about this point before we move on, let's cover those.
Sean, do you want to ask, or can I, or do you want me to ask? I have a question.
Yeah, go for it. I have a question too.
Okay, you go first. You go first.
Well, no, I think that's an interesting point, right, about the logging portion of that, because there's a lot of especially in cloud, there's just so much data flowing in, and then it just sort of it gets ingested somewhere, and then people have to go and sift through that, and then they're like, well, we have to buy a log aggregation system, and we have to ship all these logs somewhere so that we can then filter through all these logs. But I mean, you made a great point. Like, if you don't actually need the logs in the first place, don't even send them. So I guess, what would your recommendation be there for development teams? And because it's always one of those things, right, where it's like, yay, it works, and then you move on to the next thing. Like, do you recommend going back and adjusting sort of their logging levels, or just?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when something is new, right, you definitely want to have, especially if you are one of the orgs that does kind of test in production, yeah, you're going to have more logging initially, right? Because you have to have debugging if stuff goes wrong. If you have the ability to do those things in staging and dev environments, you can have your very verbose logging in those smaller environments, and you don't need them in production, right? Ideally in production, you just need to have like the stuff that security needs you, and you need it for resilience and monitoring purposes. But yeah, absolutely, in your dev environments and your staging environments, you should turn everything on, right? But in production, yeah, you can pare it down. You'll learn as you go through, like what kind of stuff you won't need. And as you iterate on it, you can get that log level down, or you can filter out specific things that you want to know. Like if you just know if it's always going to be this string, I don't need this, I'm never going to need that, right? And it's going to depend on your application. But normally if you have some kind of log shipper that's sending stuff directly from from the application stack, whether it's containers or whether it's a sidecar or something like that, you're going to have the ability to go ahead and say, I don't need this, so just discard it.
Yeah, very interesting. Good points. Great points.
No questions from the audience yet, but so you know what, I'll save my question. So Sean rubbed up to similar. I had a question in a similar vein, but I want to let you. I'm gonna like get through more of this before because I kind of like have a day in the life of Tim kind of question. Like
Okay.
like how do you convince? Because we've been there where we're talking to a customer, we're talking to an enterprise, and we're saying move the data as little as possible, and they have like a multi-cloud edict, and that might be something that's coming down the pipe here, because when you go quote unquote multi-cloud, if you've got something in Azure, you got something in AWS, you got your egress and your ingress fees skyrocket exponentially. I want to like figure out what the counter argument is to that, but I also don't want to like go way off the beaten path of what we're supposed to be doing here. So I'll shut up for now.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can have that discussion, because I think it's important, because we are talking about how you move data around, and if you're moving it between clouds, I mean, that's still something you need to consider. I mean, the basics are you want to move data into the most expensive egress, right? So if my egress is cheaper in Azure and cheaper in GCP, great, I'm going to ship my data out of there, or whatever data I need, into AWS or into GCP if that's the most expensive, right? But you're typically going to want to have some kind of single pane of glass somewhere, or you're going to want to have some kind of one place you're going to go to for simplicity's sake, and then you can aggregate your data into that one location and view it there. For for whatever that application stack is, if your logging format is all going to be the same, you can ingest it all in the same place and view it in a single pane of glass. Now you're going to have to do some dashboarding on that, but you're going to want to know what you're going to want to report on anyways. If you're doing things like alerting and stuff like that, oh yeah, CloudWatch is going to alert a little bit differently than maybe than Google or Azure, but you can still aggregate all that in one place and then view it there. Like I said, your main concern is going to be how expensive it is to get data from one place to the other, and what's the cheapest way for me to move all the data in one place. I mean, because maintaining like for example, if you're going to use Splunk, like maintaining Splunk in 3 different data centers is probably more expensive just maintaining it in one and aggregating.
Right, exactly.
So by the way, I wouldn't use Splunk. I would use the Elastic Stack, but that's just me. But that's going to be and we'll kind of cover this at the end, but that's going to be kind of very dependent on your use case. But the principle still applies. Move the data the cheapest way you can, store it the cheapest way you can, because your data egress may not be the problem. It could be the storage of all those metrics. So you're going to want to figure out what that's going to cost, and you can approximate that before you, because what your list prices is or what your negotiated prices are. You can figure that out on a whiteboard and then say, okay, we're going to move it all into here because this is going to be the least expensive way to do it.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks.
All right. So the next thing I want to talk about, you've got data and then you've got CPU, right? I don't really cover, I'm going to say honestly, I don't really cover memory because that's kind of about the CPU. And when we can start actually just have a memory as a service thing, that would be great. But for now, CPU and memory are typically bound together, but you still treat them the same. The basics are, when you use compute, you want to make every cycle count. And I say that because sometimes it's going to be better to use a few big instances than a lot of little ones, depending on what your use case is. And you can alternate between the two. A lot of times for reasons of density, we'll say a customer can use, a number of large instances for most of their use case, and then add on smaller ones to cover their usage so they don't have to over provision essentially. But when we talk about kind of what scaling looks like for compute, I like to operate on, what was a 90th percentile, right? So what's going to cover 90% of my use, like day in, day out? And I'm not talking about the spikes. But day in, day out, what's going to cover 90% of that? That's what I'm going to architect for initially, right? And then after that, I can go for, okay, how do I handle my overages? Well, you can build that in an architecture so that I don't have to add more instances, right? Can you have a queue? Do you have, do you have back pressure? Can you handle any errors or any waits within the application itself? If you do need to scale, all right, well, let's scale incrementally. If you're running, R6 16x's, maybe you don't need to add more R6 16x's. Maybe you just need to add some kind of compute, and one of the things I talk about is that, like one of the advantages of containerization allows for some really, really good bin packing. And you can also, with containerization, hopefully you can maintain compute type agnosticity. So that means you don't have to add the same exact types of instances for your on-demand for your spiky needs. You can just add whatever's there if you're going to use Spot, or if you just need to add some less expensive instances just to slide some containers on for the time being, and then spin them back down. And then you keep the main instances that you've been running the whole time. Again, these are architectural considerations because you're going to want to know these are the systems we're going to reserve or have most of the time, and then we can use these other instances. Another thing you're going to look at is like, all right, well, what's my bang for my buck? How many cycles or how much compute do I get for this dollar? If you can be CPU architecture agnostic, great. If you don't have to run on Intel, you can run on AMD or ARM. Awesome. You're going to have yourself some options for saving money that way. The other thing you always want to consider is that compute is cheaper when you don't have to bundle it with storage. So is it stateful? Is it stateless? When things are stateless, you can have more granular choices. You can adjust things where they need to be. If you're just pulling objects, great, you can throw it in S3. If you have to have block storage, okay, well, great. Do I have to have one block storage I can share through some places, or do I have to have like individual instances and containers? Ideally, when you're designing an architecture, you want to have as little storage as possible. And that's going to allow you to be more compute agnostic. But again, these are some of those considerations where it's going to be very, very use case dependent. If you're running something on a database, sure, maybe you're going to save money in compute, but then you're going to run it up in your database because you're running a bunch of stored procedures, something like that. Your mileage is going to vary on this. But these are just some basic principles you want to consider. So what rocks have I kicked over yet? Anyone have any questions on this part?
Nothing from the crew yet. I know that Sean's spending some time in container land. So Sean?
Well, I'm trying to think about how to ask this. So what do you think is sort of, if you had to slice it up into importance level or rank it, I guess, and importance level, like pre-planning your architectures for the right, like getting close to that 90% CPU right allocation, governance after the fact. So say you're just experimenting and getting something going, and then you have to like bring it back down, or even like automatic rescaling and resizing as needed, like, which I guess would fall under governance, just not manual governance. It'd be more like automated governance, because a lot of times we have the time to spend to say, I need this many CPUs, this many cores, etc. I want to use Spot. I want to do containers. And then other times the edict is we need to get this running, and here's what we think is going to be our architecture. And again, it's one of those things where it's after the fact, it's working, don't touch it, save it for another iteration cycle somewhere down the road, right? But all that time, the CPU clock is burning, and costs may be a lot higher than they need to be, right? So what do you think is the balance there? Like the pre-planning, the after the fact, just in your experience, I should say.
So,
maybe.
In my experience, once something's in production, it's not going to change, right? You're just going to keep iterating on top of that, right? And it's like, have you ever seen like old houses where they just kept adding on to whatever was there? Like they added a second floor, then they added this and they added that, and then if you need to change the wiring, you got to tear the whole house down, right?
Right.
That's usually how it works. Like most people's production is their MVP with some bells and whistles on top. And so that's why I prefer to prioritize like getting at least the best that you can do under, whatever your business concerns are on the whiteboard before you put it in there. Now, when I talk about adding, CPU and granularity, those are resilience concerns, right? So obviously you're going to have to handle your resilience on the whiteboard. That has to be in there. No one wants to deploy a production workload that they know is probably going to fall over under duress, right?
Right.
So what we're saying is when you make your plans for resilience, you want to make it at least as compute agnostic as possible. And SREs are going to love that because you're going to say, well, if I don't have to spin up this specific instance type, that's great because I don't know if I'm going to have that type of instance to spin up. So if I can select from anything in this family, whatever's first available, or if it can be Spot, wonderful. That's going to actually help your resilience and your cost optimization, because you can literally throw up any old instance you need to, within this category, and whatever the cheapest one you have, great. And then you can go up from there, as long as it'll do the job. And I said that's one of the advantages of running things in containers. But also you still want to make considerations for how you move your data, right? You don't want to you want to try and avoid a lot of inter-AZ traffic or inter-region traffic. So if you're going to throw something up, you want to try and keep it the same place as same AZ as your other stuff, so you don't have to transfer a lot of data back and forth. Maybe you can't always do that, and that's something you have to fail over to, but you at least want to make those considerations when you're writing your automation. So that's where the governance comes in, right? Your governance aspect is going to be, how do I prioritize where these containers are going to go? How do I prioritize the instance type? Can I throw in Spot? Can I just throw in, on demand? And then you're going to start getting baselines on how that's going to operate with 90%. But once you put it out, once you've hit Terraform apply in production, it's probably not going to change. And I think we've all seen that. At least, to go back and fix architectural issues is a lot like pulling teeth, literally.
Yeah. Yeah. Takes a lot to pull it back to and or redo or maintenance windows and things like that. Well, hopefully it's ephemeral enough that the maintenance window is not too bad, but or depending on your application deployment rollout,
Yeah.
you can do it in a way that you can just replace the environment. But sometimes you can't, right? Because like you said, yeah. So those are all great points. Spending the time up front to make sure prod is the best MVP it can be, and not just good enough, ship it, is very important. So
So it's in the duckbill group, one phrase Corey has that I really like a lot. It's called load bearing technical debt, right? You got technical debt, but if it's load bearing, right, you can't just tear it out, right? Because your application stack will fall down on you, right?
Oh,
And
I
if it's
like that term, load bearing. That's good. I'm gonna
yeah,
steal that.
yeah, because if whoever's done their home renovations or during contract, and I have, if you have to
Yeah.
remove a load bearing wall, you have to do a lot of stuff to make sure that you can change that. And there's a bunch of actual re-architecture in a building, right, to be able to remove a load bearing wall.
Mhm.
It's the same for your architecture. Once you have built something on top of it and something is load bearing, it is really, really, really hard to change it. So, and that gets into some of the engineering practices that I've discussed, that I've talked about, that we want to talk about, right? So, one of the things that I like to say is don't paint yourself into corners in an MVP or when you run something into production, right? Because a lot of times considerations, and we've all seen this, right? Oh, this thing is hardwired in there, or we can't actually split this out to microservices without rewriting everything. Whatever it is, leave yourself options in the code, even if it's just a to do. You have a function that runs. Okay, maybe we can split this function out to land later on. Great, right? Try and make things modular as possible on the whiteboard before you ever run into production, just so you have options in the future. Especially as maybe you don't know how something is going to cost because you haven't really put it under production loads, and then you run it at production loads like, wow, this part was more expensive than I thought it was going to be. Okay, great. Well, we can throw this in a container, or we can throw this into a message, a managed service or something like that. Wonderful. You can go ahead and do that. But if you paint yourself into a corner architecturally, you have that load bearing technical debt we talked about, right? That you can't now change because other stuff is built on top of that service or that function that cannot be removed. The other thing that I really want to talk about is cost as a metric, right? So we talk about metrics for performance. We talk about metrics for resilience, nines and uptime and stuff like that. We talk about metrics for security, right? We have some very, very definitive goals for security, operational goals, stuff like that. So we think about all the real-time metrics we get on that. And I want you to imagine, if you will, not knowing until the end of the month or a month after the fact that you had something go down. And then now you're going to make the changes to go ahead and bring something back up or replace it. Or finding out a month after the fact that someone had uploaded root keys and now you've spun up a crypto farm in your infrastructure, right? Or finding out a month after the fact, right, that instance is overloaded and you've been throwing errors to your customers this whole time because you can't get new connections, right? That seems ludicrous to us in the year of our Lord 2022. But how many times do we have no idea what we're spending until after the invoice comes out? And then you kind of divvy it out and says, oh, well, this is how much y'all cost last month or last quarter or something like that. So if you treat cost as a metric, then you can apply SRE principles to it, right? If I know something is costing too much as real time as it can be, then I can make reactions on it. I can do things like, oh, wow, okay, I got paged on this thing because this, very expensive instance type got spun up. So we're going to go ahead and fix that, before the bill comes. Or as you're benchmarking and deploying things, okay, well, we did this in pre-prod and we figure, it's going to use this much and use this much. I know, what my benchmark numbers are for performance. And here's my benchmark number for cost. Well, that cost is a little more than we were estimating for the project. So let's see how we can get that a little more optimized and efficient before it hits production. And those are some of the things that you can do, just because as engineers and as nerds and geeks, all of us, if you give us a metric, we're going to game it. We are going to do our best to make that metric as pretty as possible, just so we can brag to our other friends. It's a thing we do, right? I cop to it. It's like, oh, you got your service had like 4 nines. Oh, okay, cool. Check this out. 7 nines. What? Oh, you did yours in 17 lines of code. I did mine in 13.
Ooh, you're slick.
So yeah, put the metric out there. Let people be aware of it, and then they can. And once they're aware of it, then they can start modifying their behaviors. And then you can put. You don't have to put KPIs on it or be punitive about it, but just as long as people are aware of cost as a metric, then they can take steps to minimize it as they develop or as they spin things up or spin things down. Use cost in your benchmarking and testing, and if you're benchmarking and testing, when you're done, please turn it off. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it is a really, really, really big thing that we see. Obviously there are some other ones, some concerns, especially if you're doing a lot of CI/CD work where you're going to leave environments up. Great. But, especially POCs and projects and stuff like that, make sure you turn it off. There's the thing of governance, and you can tag and stuff like that. And, there's a lot of ways to skin that cat. And I don't really want to dive too deeply into that because that's premium content. But but those are just things you want to kind of consider as an engineering practice you're going forward. So any questions about this part? Because this is the part I think is going to have the most kind of questions, because this is very much, we do this and we do this and we do that. So let's hear them if you got them.
Yeah, this is, I mean, just to piggyback on that, one of the things that when we're creating designs, as a cloud architect, you create your 3 different designs: your conceptual, your logical, and your physical designs. Your napkin scratchings of how the design looks, the conceptual, the logical for like, the square blocks, and the physical, which is your IP addresses and stuff. And one of the things that we started doing that I've been a big proponent of is creating a financial diagram as well. How much things are going to cost when they run. So you've got, this system over here, and this EC2 instance has this run rate, but what you fail to recognize is that stuff over a network costs money too. So now we're starting to accommodate for pipes running in and out, your egress fees, all those charges. So I love the concept of using costing as a KPI metric. But how are you going to capture that? When, I mean, obviously you can set up your billing alarms, and you can have things going from that perspective. Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about even more granular?
That's one way of doing it. You can get more granular depending on what your overall what you use for automation. Terraform has some things where you can get some estimates, and there are other companies there that kind of like act as a shim between you and your cloud provider to give you estimates. Honestly, this is a thing that companies have written their own stuff like that, but really this is something where I'm going to look at AWS, and I'm going to look at Datadog, and I'll look at New Relic and all these other APM and metrics companies to say, we need something from y'all. Like, what's running, how long it's been running, how much network is running, because I can find all that in my dashboards. Why can't I estimate a cost based on that?
So thank you for saying that, because I was going to follow up with, AWS has been historically so shitty at giving any form of like granular real-time visibility into how fast things are running. And that's something that whenever we're having one of those NDA talks with them, we're like, what can we do better? I'm like, improve your pricing, improve your visibility. If I can have an electrical meter on the side of my house that tells me to the penny how much I'm burning in real time, why can't you do the exact same thing?
Well, I mean, the realty is, if you're ready for this.
Throw some shade. We're ready.
Internally, right? Internally, they know. They've got the API calls internally, right? They can figure, it's not real time, but it's pretty damn close, right?
Oh yeah.
But to be very, very fair, AWS's billing system is it is dark magic in a sense that is no one understands it, but it is very much magic. And so I don't know what it would take to be able to bubble or service that, but that is a very, very, very big pain point for AWS customers. Not being able to service that as a metric very easily. And it's something that they really need to change. And I dare say it's not just AWS. I really feel like,
Yeah.
that is a big hole and a big gap that has been not filled by any of the cloud providers, nor the metrics vendors that run on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm picking on AWS because they're the one I'm the most familiar with. I know that they're all, relatively equally crappy when it comes to that. So I'm just picking on the one that I love the most.
Yeah. And so that's why I was saying before, like, as near real time as possible. So for whatever granularity that you can get, let's do that versus, like I said, waiting till the end of the month or the month after to say, all right, well, here was the invoice. Here's what you did, but yeah, no, I think that is as more companies start to use cost as a metric, that would increase pressure on the cloud providers and the metrics providers to be able to give cost as a near real-time metric.
Right. Yeah, totally.
And I think that's a missed point too. I mean, it's a great point. We always take metrics, like when we have our application out there, we have a metric network baseline, metric compute baseline, metric memory, back pressure baseline, queue baseline, all that. But how many companies actually like consciously sit down and say, okay, our app's out there, we're going to we're starting, today is 0.0, we're going to go 3 months and we're going to take a cost baseline. And then, 5 months from now, same, like setting up alarms in CloudWatch, right? Like, oh my God, our costs are super high. Something weird must be going on in the environment, or maybe we missed something. Let's bring it down, right? Or I don't like, yeah, in my experience, like, it's companies are thinking about those cloud costs, but I don't know if they're like consciously going through that exercise consistently, right?
Yeah. So that style of cost modeling I have seen, and I've worked with customers that do that. These are large companies that can afford people. That's their whole job, right? And the problem is because you have to cost model it like that because you don't actually have the ability to measure it or observe it real time. So you have to kind of estimate it after the fact. This is why your tagging strategies and stuff like that are so important, because in order for you to model application cost, if you want to cost model like cost per user, cost per transaction, or whatever that is, especially if you're a company trying to IPO, you're going to want to know these things, right? So you can kind of make your estimates and models and stuff like that. You're going to want to cost model and forecast just like you were in a data center if you're going to do an EDP, because you're going to want to have a very, very good idea of what your projected growth is over time. And the only way to do that is to have a good understanding of what your cloud spend is and why it is, right? So the tagging and applications and stuff like the application tagging and resource tagging are very, very important. Not everything can be tagged, right? So that's why, you do have to do some other trickery and other kind of, whiz bang smoke and mirrors and stuff like that in order to have a good understanding of costs. AWS does have some tools around that are there. They're not great, but they are better than nothing for the most part.
Well, data transfer is a prime example of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to do a lot of forensic work to understand where data went back and forth. And AWS's recommendation is like, hey, turn on VPC flow logging, which itself is prohibitively expensive. So I need to spend a lot of money to figure out where I spent money is certainly a very kind of interesting take.
Right. Yeah.
So any other questions around that part?
The attendees are being kind of shy this evening. I don't know what's going on. One mentioned, good point, for on-premise architectures, customers always know what the five-year capex and opex will be on day one, which is true. And part of the allure or part of the promise of cloud has always been the transition from capex to opex. And that's that's going the way it's going. We're watching that in real time to see the success and or failure of that at all levels.
Well, the funny part about that is, you were told, oh, we're going to move to a consumption model and it's going to be utility billed, right?
Mhm.
And that's the appeal. It's like you're only going to get paid for what you use, and that great promise sounds really good until you understand that you don't really have good visibility into what you're using and how much it costs until maybe after the fact, or maybe
Mhm.
long after the fact. And that's one of those things where I feel like, just from a customer advocate point, like that story could be a lot better. And it's not, again, we're talking about AWS because that's what we're using right now, but that's not specific to AWS. That's with any cloud provider. Anytime you move to a consumption model, then you really don't have the visibility until you want to until after the fact. It's like your utility bill, right? You can use a lot of power, but you're not going to know at the end of the month. Now, if you can go back and look at your power meter, yeah, you have an idea, but you have to keep a track of that yourself. Or tracking down a leak, right? Who here's ever had a leak in their house? Because I've had before, where there's like a leaky line in a fridge or a toilet, and then I was like, I don't know, my water bill's so high, and now you have to go and try and track down where it is, because you're not tagging those water droplets. You don't know where they're going. You just got to go through and like turn stuff off and turn it back on again until you find out what it is. It's tedious, and I feel like it could be better. And if it really should be better, I think, going forward. But that's one of those things where we have to put that pressure on our providers, to say like, hey, we need better resources for this.
Definitely. Nice. All right. I'm double checking Twitter right now. No tags on the hashtag. So I think we're good. I think we're good for questions.
So last bit, some of these things, a lot of this stuff is conditional. We'll tell you if you ever come to the duck bill group, it's like, well, how much was this or how much is this? How much can you save? It's going to depend, because I can't, until we really get in and look at what you're doing, I can't make any guarantees. We can say, well, if we look at your bill, it's probably going to be this, this, and this, and this, but I don't know, right? These are just things that you want to keep in mind as you are sitting down to write new projects, or as you're iterating on stuff like that. Or you have a brand new startup idea and you're going to start writing on the whiteboard. Don't paint yourself into corners. If you are an engineering manager, these are things maybe you want to look at in your architecture, and then start making goals around implementing some of these things, and seeing what your low hanging fruit is, what kind of juice is worth the squeeze, or some things where you've already painted yourself into a corner. And then when you're going to look at what the next iteration of your architecture looks like, to keep these things in mind. If you do have specific questions about, like, so I will say, like, I'm I'm much more an architecture and engineering practice. I'm good at looking at a bill or your cost explorer and saying, well, this, and this, and this. Corey's the one who's the real genius at that point. I'm much more looking at your whiteboard or looking at your architecture diagram and then pointing out where you can optimize there. But yeah, no, just, I mean, the thing that I want to take away, anything like that, it's like if you're gonna wear a wig, right? You can't just take it out of the box and put it on, or take it out of the bag and put it on. You need to, I don't care if you cut it, I don't care if you style it, I don't care if you backcomb it, I don't care if you trim the lace. It doesn't matter what you do, just do anything. Anything that you do in the terms of cost optimization is better than doing nothing, right? So if you can only do, CPU agnosticity, great. That's going to save you a little something. If you can only do, minimizing your data transfer, great. That's going to save you something, right? Don't worry about it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Your AWS bill is never going to be zero unless you don't want to use AWS, right? But you can try and make it a little bit better. And remember, cost optimization isn't always about making it less expensive, right? It's about not spending more than you need to.
No, absolutely. And Tim, so a few questions popped up here, and good questions at that. So Rob asks, cloud financials seem to be a moving target. At what cadence do you recommend spending time to evaluate costs? I already have a lot on my plate. So how do I balance, what do I need to do to balance this, and what cadence do you recommend?
It's going to all depend, like how much of a pain point your AWS bill is going to determine how much focus you need to really put on it. If you've got the runway and it's not a big deal, I wouldn't necessarily stress it too much right now. Just, you're going to get a bill every month, have a good look at it, make sure make sure nothing is out of the ordinary, compare it to the bill the previous month. And there's something don't look right. Have a look at it. We had I've got a customer now that, their Route 53 usage quintupled over a month. And they were like, well, that doesn't look right. Let me have a peek at that, right? But for the
Yeah.
most part, costs are rising kind of as projected, and nothing's really a pain point. You have to do it. If your AWS bill is a pain point, and you say like, we need to spend less, all right, well, that's when it becomes more of a priority. The financial aspect is always going to be a business priority first and foremost, because if you give all your money to AWS and you can't pay your developers, well, then now you've got a problem. But if you but you can still look at these things kind of going forward from an architecture level. But if you're looking at kind of like review and oversight, as often as you can, and what the business priority on that is going to be completely dependent organization.
Great. And then Kyle had a statement and a question in the chat. So he really liked the old house analogy for replatforming and modernization. On the cost modeling, planning ahead steps, have you seen a solid approach to assessing where, like, if we're taking the cost, and then Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong here in asking your question. So have you seen a solid approach to assessing like where you're at and where to start for moving to different types of modernization? So i.e. lift, shift, optimize, and build in those metrics as you eat the elephant.
So there's a few ways. Like if you just use like the well architected kind of framework within the AWS console, that's going to be one good way to kind of figure out what your low hanging fruit is and where you have room to optimize within your current architecture, right? And this is going to be things like turning stuff off, get rid of old EBS volumes, those kinds of things like that. Those are the automated recommendations that don't really require a bunch of nuance. It just requires engineering effort to actually do, right? But as far as when you're looking at how do you assess where you are overall, especially with organizationally and architecturally, you have to kind of first define what a maturity level is, right? And you can base it a lot on the same kind of cloud adoption maturity levels. You see it's like, what are your how much is managed services, how much is serverless functions, how much are you just running in containers or microservices, how much are instantiated workloads. Those things that I just talked about there are still a lot of things that you would end up doing for cost optimization as well, right? Stateful versus stateless workloads, how are you running Spot, those things like that. So as far as when is the right time to do it, again, it's going to be kind of like, first and foremost, if you have a business need to do it right then, right now, we would always recommend doing cost optimization effort. If you have an EDP, you always want to do a cost optimization effort that finishes at least 6 months before your EDP expires. Or if you're before you negotiate one, you never want to negotiate an EDP and then do cost optimization. Because it turns out if you may save a lot of money, it's not going to matter. You're still going to have to pay AWS whatever you promised them. So you always want to do cost optimization before you commit. Aside from that, it's going to be maybe quarterly, maybe annually. Especially if you have annual reports and stuff like that, that's a good time to review where you are. But aside from that, it's going to be whatever the business needs of your organization are. I hope that answered your question, Kyle. It's kind of like it is very much like, well, it depends, but it does depend because every organization size is different. I think especially when you're talking about something like a lift and shift, you're going to want to see what that workload is and really examine if it's something that can be moved off. What does the engineering effort look like to kind of split up versus just completely, building a new application, do the same load and then retiring the old one.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Kyle, for the question. Yeah, I think we're good for questions for now. Chris, do you see any questions on your end?
I'm just capturing everything Tim's saying and putting them in tweets, little nuggets of wisdom strewn about Twitter. So I have not, but I did not see any. Nobody popped up with any questions as I was going. So
Great.
I think we're good.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that was a lot of fun, y'all.
Yeah.
I think I will stop share now.
So this is something that I did not know about you.
Mm-hmm.
You profess to be an introvert. Is that true?
I'm an extroverted introvert. I'm an introvert that's really good at being extroverted. But when I'm done, I'm done. Like I just, and it's yeah, I don't, it's one of those things that I'm great socially talking to people. When I'm done, I just want to be by myself. So I will spend a lot of time in my, conferences. I will dip out to my room and just hang out there with my hoodie on. Or if I have to be somewhere, you'll see me with my hood up and headphones on because I'm trying to, gather some energy there. But yeah. So a lot of that's anxiety.
That was so I was specifically I ran into Corey at reInvent, and I was specifically looking for you because I wanted to bag you for this talk, and I figured I'd just get you in person since we were both there, and then I saw a tweet from you saying I've run out of juice, the introvert has taken over, shutting down in my room, and I was like, oh, I had no idea. I wouldn't have guessed it.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's one of those things where I just used to feel like, oh, I just got to push through it and suck it up. And I'm not doing that anymore, right? It's
be kind to yourself.
It's good to have boundaries, right? And and to have them be recognized and respected. And I'm fortunate enough to say like, yeah, no, I'm done. I just need to go back in my room and watch TV with the lights off.
Yeah, dude, I tell you, I mean, even me as I am a true dyed in the wool hyper extrovert. The more people, the better. The more energy I feed, the liver I get. Even with that, after 2 years of being in shutdown mode because of the pandemic, reInvent was too much, and that was a third of the people as normal.
Yeah.
But even with that, I was like, I now know how introverts feel. I had to turn off and go back to my room and just just stare at a wall for a couple of hours sometimes just to get my energy back. So I don't know how you guys do that all the time. I couldn't.
I mean, it's a skill like anything else. It's like cardio, right? You get used to it. I'm not used to it anymore, just as you are. So I could power through it. My tank for being social used to be larger, but it's not now. So
right. I figure as things hopefully knock on, as things get better and as more conferences happen, my extrovertedness will reassert, or maybe not. Maybe I'm perfectly happy being an introvert with my little sketchbook in the room now. So we'll see.
And it's funny too, because sometimes I'm just old now, right? I can't, I can
these kids.
I can party like a rock star. I just can't recover like a rock star anymore. So it's really not worth, the day and a half long hangover is really not worth it anymore. So I'm just like, no, y'all, I got 2 glasses of wine and I'm gonna go to my room.
Absolutely not. Yeah. We had a fellow coworker that came with us this year. One of our engagement managers, Margot, who's absolutely brilliant. But she's 25. For her age group, she is like the most put together and most brilliant engagement manager on the planet. 25 years old, and she was trying to get me to oh, we got Tatanka tonight, we got Midnight Madness, we got replay, we got the post party after replay. I was like, nope.
No, man, no. Sorry.
I got a nice hotel room and a bottle of vodka that somebody gave me and a TV.
Yeah, TV and a really, really comfy bed and some joggers I can put on. So
yeah. Exactly. Nice. Cool. Okay. So if there's anybody in the audience that had any last questions for Mr. Banks, official, please let us know. People saying thank you. Fellow ambivert, Is that the term for it? An
I
introvert
think
that can
so.
an ambivert?
Yeah.
That's Shala. I'll ask her that tomorrow. Cool. Oh, and Rob's in the audience. Rob is one of the AWS data heroes. Awesome
Oh,
guy.
nice. Nice.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think we're good.
Awesome. Yeah, this is a great time. I really appreciate y'all.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
dude.
thanks so
We're
much, Tim.
Yeah, my pleasure.
super excited to have you on.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. I love this.
Cool. Well, Sean, do you want to walk us out?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Thanks. Very, very informative. Thank you all who joined. You will be able to see this on YouTube coming up soon, and we'll see you here next week. I think we have one next week. Next week we do.
Cool.
See
All
you.
right. Good night, folks. Have a good night.